Right. So Moonshot AI is already talking about Kimi K4. And the timing on that is a little wild, because K3 has barely been out 2 weeks. Two people with knowledge of the plan say the next model will be significantly bigger than K3, which is already a monster. And there's exactly one thing in the way. To train something that large, Moonshot needs more of Nvidia's top-end AI chips. And under US export rules, Chinese firms aren't supposed to be getting those at all. Which brings us to what everyone's been whispering about since mid-July. Kimi K3 is right now the largest open-source model going, 2.8 trillion parameters. And according to 3 people, it was trained on Nvidia silicon, including Blackwell, the most advanced stuff. That partially confirms what Michael Kratsios, a senior White House official, posted on X, so this isn't a rumor floating around a Discord server anymore. Moonshot is now hunting more Blackwell access specifically to prep the next generation, K4 included. The problem is, the White House's version of events differs from what sources say actually happened. Kratsios claimed K3 was trained at a data center in Thailand, and that framing matters, because Chinese access to Nvidia chips in Thailand might be permissible under current US rules. It's the clean explanation. Except one of the 3 sources says K3 was trained partly inside China, and the reason is one of the most underrated bottlenecks in this story. China's own cross-border data transfer rules make it a nightmare to move the enormous pre-training datasets out to an overseas facility. So even if you wanted to stay offshore and technically compliant, Beijing pushes you back home. 2 governments' regulations pointing opposite directions, and the model gets trained somewhere in the middle. The how is the part I find most impressive purely as engineering. Moonshot couldn't walk up to one supplier and rent a giant coherent cluster because nobody in China had enough Blackwell sitting around. So they tapped at least 2 different Chinese cloud firms that had Blackwell, and it's still unrules. What Moonshot ended up with was a pile of 8-chip Blackwell servers stitched together into something big enough to train on, a dramatically smaller building block than what the biggest American labs use for frontier runs. To make that work at all, Moonshot's engineers refined the network design themselves, improving how the chips talk to each other and, critically, across data centers owned by completely different providers. Multi-provider distributed training on hardware you're not supposed to have. And they're not the only ones playing this game. Days after K3 dropped, Alibaba pulled out Qwen 3.8 Max, its largest model ever at 2.4 trillion parameters, claiming performance comparable to top US models. 2 people say Alibaba trained that one on Nvidia chips too, Blackwell included. Then rewind to December, when the information reported DeepSeek was training its next model on Blackwell chips that had been smuggled into the country. That model, V4, came out earlier this year. So we've now got a pattern that's hard to argue with. 3 of China's most visible labs, 3 of the most talked about open weight releases, and Nvidia hardware underneath all of them. Which is the awkward part of the narrative, because the story everyone likes to tell is that Chinese startups are disrupting Silicon Valley. And they are. But they're doing it while depending on American technology to get there. Beijing has poured enormous state money into the domestic chip industry for years. And for inference, for actually serving models, China is adopting local silicon pretty fast. Training is the wall. A researcher at a major Chinese tech firm who works on model training said K3 kicked off a new round of arms race among Chinese developers, and he and others point to the same 2 things they need from Nvidia: stability and high-speed networking. Doing this on domestic chips wouldn't just be harder. They say it'd sit somewhere between very difficult and outright impossible. So the geopolitical position these companies sit in is precarious. Every frontier-level open model trained on Blackwell is a live demonstration that US export restrictions aren't working as designed. And that lands at a moment when Chinese open models being adopted by American businesses already has Washington nervous about China's position in AI, with those models taking share from leading US models and eating into their potential. Some in the US also argue the models were built on American work more directly. In that same X post, Kratsios accused Moonshot of using US model output to train K3, the distillation accusation, which comes up basically every time a Chinese... Now, on the inference side, the picture is different but not exactly comfortable. Moonshot leans heavily on Nvidia's H20 to actually run K3 on the Kimi platform, according to 3 people with direct knowledge. Release, Moonshot stopped accepting new subscriptions entirely. Their X post about it was just, "Our GPUs are feeling it," which is a fairly relatable status update, and they said they'd reopen once more compute came online. Except finding that compute is going to take a while, and the reason is a beautiful little policy knot. Beijing has been discouraging local companies from using the H20 and pushing them toward Chinese-designed accelerators instead. Fine in theory. The problem is that a small group, mainly Anthropic and OpenAI, who've pushed for restrictions or regulation, or otherwise discouraged American businesses from touching those models over what are described as theoretical national security and cybersecurity concerns. On the subject of what benchmarks actually measure, OpenAI published something this week that's a very clean example of how much of an eval score isn't the model at all. The setup: GPT 5.6 Sol has cracked long-standing open math problems, including the cycle double cover conjecture, and it's beaten Pokemon Fire Red. Then it goes to Arc AGI 3, a benchmark of 2D puzzle games, and scores 7.8%. GPT 5.5 could barely play at all. At 0.4 Arc, the generic harness is deliberate. No tools, no special features, the argument being that a bare-bones setup exposes shortcomings and keeps comparisons fair, whereas commercial developers tune harnesses around each model's quirks. And there's real evidence for the harness mattering elsewhere. Sol beat Fire Red with a vision-only harness on the GPT Plays Pokemon stream, took Slay the Spire through Codex computer use on Epoch AI's stream, and got through the early stages of Baba Is You in work shared by Pyotr Migdal and Pyotr Grabowski. Ethan Malik also showed it clearing a randomized daily challenge in Slay the Spire 2, a game released after the model's knowledge cutoff. OpenAI's recommendations are straightforward. Use the Responses API rather than legacy chat completions, retain reasoning, use compaction, and if you're comparing models, lean on evals configured that way. They also say this isn't the first time a surprisingly low public score traced back to a runner dropping reasoning messages. If you want to try the puzzles yourself, there are 25 demo games up at arcprize.org/tasks. Last thing, and it's a big one, on Tuesday, more than 1,100 employees across the major labs signed onto an initiative called Pacing the Frontier, asking the US government to back an international effort to build the technical and governance tools needed to deliberately pace frontier automated AI development. Meta, Anthropic, OpenAI, and Google are all represented, with backing from the nonprofits Guidelight AI Standards and Encode AI. The signature list is not junior staff either. Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei and several co-founders, Meta's VP of AI Research, Dawn Song, and OpenAI Chief Scientist Jacob Pachaki. OpenAI responded on X saying that, at some point, acceleration in frontier development may get high enough that the world will need to pace the rate of advancement. Anthropic pointed at its own recursive self-improvement research from last month as evidence the tooling is needed so society can prepare, and it was also Anthropic that called on major labs last month to consider a coordinated pause. Warning systems could start improving themselves faster than the risks can be managed. Separately, on Monday, Nvidia announced a coalition with Adobe, CrowdStrike, and others to build AI safety and cybersecurity tooling, which follows a recent Hugging Face cybersecurity incident that